And welcome to everyone who is watching. There is some news out of Washington this morning. There is a bill that is about to be filed in the House of Representatives, which would change the PROMESA law. And if you don't live in Puerto Rico, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, what is that? If you live in Puerto Rico, you know a lot about it and you care about it. It is the law that was established, passed by the Congress in 2016, signed under President Obama. Nobody thought it was perfect, but they thought it was what was needed at that time to get it done. Joining me now live to discuss this bill that would change the PROMESA law is the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee in the House of Representatives, Congressman Raúl Grijalva from Arizona. Good morning, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for the invite. Appreciate it very much.
So I would like to, sir, if we can, the bill is dozens of pages. I have gone through it and picked out what is arguably the most substantive and most important to the people who are watching. But before I get to my questions, I want to let you start and tell us your reaction to this day. You took 2 trips to Puerto Rico. You had 2 hearings last year. A lot of work has gone into this. What is your reaction for being here, and what do you want people to know about the bill?
I thought your premise at the beginning that the urgency of the PROMESA Act that Obama signed into law was just that, the fiscal crisis that was upon Puerto Rico at the time demanded something and demanded solvency and it demanded some action. So that was a compromise. It was a compromise that in a bifurcated government where my Republican colleagues control the House of Representatives and the Senate, and the presidency was Obama. And so we came up with this hybrid, and essentially putting this oversight board to restructure the debt, to set priorities for the island, and to begin to stabilize the economy of Puerto Rico and the fiscal crisis that they were going under. It wasn't perfect, and as such, when we had the opportunity to be in charge of the committee in the House of Representatives that I did, we began the process of re-examining the law after a couple of years and to look at what needed to be reformed within that law in order to make it fair and, more importantly, to really reflect what were the real needs of Puerto Rico. At that time, 2 things got mixed together, and the fiscal crisis and Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Irma, the earthquakes, and now having the convulsion of this horrible pandemic that is going on across the world and affecting all of us. And that brought even more stress upon it. And so we visited communities. We talked to representatives of organized labor, students, nonprofits, community-based organizations, government officials, Oversight Board representatives and their directors, and came to some conclusions as to what some areas of reform needed to happen in order to make the intent of stabilizing the government and putting in those additional factors of the natural disasters that had occurred and the pandemic into play in putting this piece of reforms together.
All right, so for people who are watching, let's talk about what is going to change should this become law. We will talk about toward the end of the interview what the likelihood is of it in the current political climate. But regarding the bill, what, sir, do you believe is the #1 most important thing that you are delivering here for people you've heard from that will change?
Well, I think we define. I think within this present what we're submitting today is defining essential services. That was kind of left open-ended. It was left up to the Oversight Board almost entirely. And essential services to me had to do with healthcare for the people of the island. It had to do with the protection and sustaining the University of Puerto Rico and the education system as a whole on the island. It had to do with protecting pensions. It had to do with controlling job losses in terms of retaining public employees in their jobs on the island. And so we saw essential services as the safety net the human infrastructure issues that were so important to the people of Puerto Rico. Because unfortunately, the Oversight Board was looking at austerity only as its means to deal with the debt and deal with the crisis. And we felt that if we cut away those essential services that I just mentioned, we were essentially making the situation worse and putting a burden on the people of Puerto Rico that was almost impossible for them to sustain.
All right. So this law, if it were to become law, the bill would force the board to define essential services. But let me ask you this question. One of the things that people will hear in a moment, because I just did an interview with the executive director of the Oversight Board, and one of the things she said was, my concern is right now we are allocating money where we think it's important. For example, with the Boys and Girls Club of the island, because we think that's an important service. So if we were required to define something as essential, the Oversight Board's belief is that the creditors would then come in and say, okay, wait a minute, you've defined this as essential, so nothing else, nowhere, give us our money. You don't have any other wiggle room. What's your response to that, sir?
I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that the director is talking about. When we're talking about essential services, we're talking about the basic human infrastructure in any society that's needed. And it's not only a question of defining what they are, it's a question of prioritizing them as you put your fiscal plans together. These must be priorities within that fiscal plan. I think that there are areas such as healthcare and education and the university and employment that are not discretionary. And doing something for the Boys and Girls Clubs is a good thing. I don't begrudge that at all, but and I think that should be something that people protect. But at the same time, we're talking about an overall human infrastructure package here that is more comprehensive than having the discretion to pick which service and which service I don't do. The issue for the Oversight Board, I think the difficulty that they have with this defining essential services is that not only do you define it, you make it a priority in your fiscal plan.
All right. Next point. A lot of people have talked about auditing the debt. Would this bill force the Oversight Board to audit the debt?
Absolutely. I think that is the audit, and we do it with a commission, with an audit commission, a multi-sector commission. Representing the stakeholders in Puerto Rico that provides transparency, that looks at the debt, that looks at what is being contracted, what expenditures are going on. We couple that with asking GAO to do the same kind of audits and to make that transparent and available. We also include in there the fact that there's a disclosure issue, there's a transparency issue where the information and the priorities and the expenditures are all open and available to in a public format and to the public. We do that because I think one of the things that I saw when I was in the island and felt from the conversations, whether it was the driver that was taking us around or it was the alcaldesa of a given municipio, that the lack of trust, and I'll put it bluntly, no trust in La Junta and the Oversight Board in terms of what they were doing, their priorities for people themselves, and a lack of trust in the central government as well as to how their needs were being met and why it was taking so long to get certain actions done and certain resources to certain places. And so this transparency, this audit is all necessary, not just for the functioning of how we do the fiscal plan and how it's implemented, but also for developing, I think, a level of trust among the people of Puerto Rico that the intention is being carried out.
Mr. Chairman, let's go to a next major change that would make a lot of people happy on the island. This bill would, correct me if I'm wrong, classify the UPR system as an essential service. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell us what that would mean. What would be required?
would be would be required is that the institution and its function, I believe, is essential. That it would be protected, that it would be a priority in terms of resource allocation, and that instead of talking about shrinking that function, you talk about sustaining it and growing that function. In the economic development of the island, you have to retain your talent, you have to educate your talent, and you have to promote your talent. And the talent is there for that to happen. But you need the institutional framework and you need the institution to do it. And so protecting this asset, this intellectual, academic, and community asset, I think is critical. The development of any society without having that educational infrastructure and the higher learning infrastructure so needed in any society, I think would be totally detrimental to the development, the economic development of the island. You have to seed your own, and in seeding your own, you develop the talent that is going to stay there and help this island grow to the full that it can. To me, this is one thing that I have really pitched, because I don't see us being able to talk about economic development, stability, if you have not developed and promoted the talent that's going to be needed to carry this out.
Congressman, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't think that the UPR is an essential, is essential to creating growth and just bettering the island, right? But some people disagree as to whether it should be defined as an essential service under the restructuring project. And one thing the critics would say is, listen, the UPR needs to do a better job of getting alumni money, right? And doing what other universities do in terms of bringing in money that way. And maybe the UPR doesn't need, let's say, 11 campuses across the island. They can do with fewer. That's what some of the critics would say in terms of defining this. What is your response?
That the university in and of itself is a public institution. And from talking to students, you saw students from all economic sectors of Puerto Rico represented in those groupings. And I think that's the way it should be. It's an engine of opportunity, and you have to sustain that. And you have to make it accessible, and you have to make it affordable. And as a public institution, that's why you protect it. This is not a private institution. This is not an institution that is segmented just for one sector of society. It is a public institution open to all, and as such, I think provides the best opportunity for all the people on the island. And I think it needs to grow, and I think it needs to be sustained. And I defend it as a public institution, essential to that island. And as a public institution, it is not going to always be the endowment university for Puerto Rico. It is not always going to be the for-profit university that makes money. It is going to be the university that extends opportunity and works hard to balance its books. But for it to, it's not a profit-making institution. It is an opportunity institution, and we have to accept that and treat it like a public institution that it is.
Let's talk about another major change that the bill would bring about if it were to become law. It would, correct me if I'm wrong, prevent people who previously worked in the government, served in the government, from being on the Oversight Board. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think that we have examples of former presidents of the Puerto Rico Development Bank going onto the Oversight Board and then participating in the restructuring of the debt for that particular bank. I'm not implying or stating that there was something illegal or wrong about that, but I think conflict of interest has to be part of it, and there's strong provisions in there to prevent that, both on the other Oversight Board and former government employees coming and working both as consultants having to do with debt restructuring. And I think that's important. that's again uh, an important mechanism for the people of Puerto Rico to feel that there is some level of confidence and trust that the decisions that are being made by the Oversight Board are free of conflict, totally free of conflict, not even the implication of conflict, and that the primary interest is the public interest. And so, yeah, restricting that presence on the Oversight Board, I think, is a necessary step.
Congressman, someone said to me a short time ago, David, if you were to restrict that, so to speak, and make that applicable, you'd be hard pressed to get anyone from Puerto Rico to serve on the board. What would be your response to that?
I think I don't agree with that. I believe that there is more than enough people that can that are qualified and able to do that function without carrying the trappings of former employment or a former position that could draw conclusions or implications or appearance of conflict. I think the talent, the capacity pool is much larger than what is being implied.
Another element of the bill, Mr. Chairman, is that the funding for the board would shift. So right now, the people of Puerto Rico are paying to fund the board, but the bill would force the federal government to pay that. Why do you believe the federal government should pay rather than the people of Puerto Rico?
Based on precedent, when Washington, D.C., the city of Washington, D.C., went through its fiscal crisis and its complete restructuring, and a board was put, an authority was put over local government in order to balance and get out of the debt. That was paid by the federal government in its entirety, the function of that board, the staffing of that board, and the expenditures of that board. Same thing happened in Detroit, and the state of Michigan, state government paid that cost. And I think it's only fair that this oversight board is a creation of the federal government through the act of Congress and through law. And as such, we should pay the bill under Title III and say this is a legitimate government federal expenditure and shouldn't be passed down to the people of Puerto Rico.
Mr. Chairman, I just went about picking 4 or so items from this. And by the way, for everybody watching, I will post the entire bill that you can read, very legalese. But I pulled out 4 of the most important. What have I left out, sir, that you would like to talk about? What else do you think people should know would be some significant changes?
That we are the attempt of this legislation is to reform an existing law. And part of the criticism is that it doesn't go far enough, that there is no need for the oversight board, that there is no need for the heavy hand of the federal government to be involved in the self-determination and decision-making of the people of Puerto Rico through their government. And philosophically, I don't have a disagreement with that. I'm dealing in a world of reality here, that this law needs to be changed. It was done at a time when the balance of power was different in Congress. We have an opportunity in the House of Representatives to pass a law that would make the process of the Oversight Board and the federal government's role in Puerto Rico fairer and more equitable to the people of Puerto Rico. That's the effort. And I'm not even proposing or promoting this as a perfect solution, but we're dealing with a reality. The reality is that the people of Puerto Rico have suffered enough. And when you confront the two, the natural disasters, the fiscal crisis, the pandemic that we're struggling with right now, the people of Puerto Rico, as citizens of the United States of America, deserve a degree of fairness and equity in how we do this. And this is an effort to try to get at those two. And I will never claim that it's perfect. Some of the things that we had proposed early on, we took out of the bill because that was the reaction that we got from people when we were on the island and met with all the individuals and organizations that we did.
What did you take out of the bill?
we took out a coordinator position for everything because it just seemed like another layer on top of the oversight board. And they were correct in that assessment. They really were. That was, I'm sad to say that was my idea, but it was an idea that whose time had not come. And I also learned a lot on these trips. And one of the things that I learned, I think not only learned but experienced, was that the people of Puerto Rico have a resilience and a real sense of pride about who they are and what their island is, and their vision of the island is I don't think is being realized in the sense that people don't understand that we're talking about a history here in relationship to the United States, about colonization more than anything else, and that our role as the federal government is not to be the overseer, but to be the partner. And until things change down the road, until that relationship is defined differently, we are trying to make this reforma law less overseer and more partner, and that's been the effort. And one of the things that the people of Puerto Rico did tell me over and over again is that they just didn't trust that the intentions of the federal government were good intentions, and they didn't trust that the intentions of their central government were good intentions. And working to establish that trust is part of this effort as well.
There are 4 representatives who have signed on to this bill thus far. Representative Darren Soto of Florida, Representative Jose Serrano from New York, Representative Nydia Velasquez, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, all of whom are Puerto Rican. Are you signed on to it as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so
the individuals that helped a lot with this, all of them. Nydia's ideas are in this bill,
right.
On the audit. Conflicts of interest are Mr. Serrano's points that he pushed very, very hard, and I'm going to miss him terribly. This is his last term in Congress, and I learned a great deal from the dean. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez brings an energy and a perspective that is needed, and Mr. Soto has been consistent about the economic development questions on there. Mr. Garcia, who represents Chicago and many Boricuas from Illinois in his district, has been consistently not only supportive but bringing ideas. This is a culmination of a lot of work, and to have the diversity of members of Puerto Rican members of Congress, all of them on the bill is a good thing, because
do you have any Republicans? Do you have any Republicans who signed on?
I'm hopeful. I think we're going to get some bipartisan support, especially around from Florida and parts of New York, and maybe some other parts of the country. There's been interest on the part of colleagues in the past, and we're going to make a special effort to make sure that happens.
I saw that the resident commissioner from Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, is not signed on. Do you know why?
At this point, I don't. But we're going to have a hearing on this legislation, and we will make every effort to make sure that she is fully engaged. I think at some point, she'll have to either declare her support or non-support for it. She has done neither, and I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, she'll support it.
All right, let's talk about the reality here. So the Democrats are in the majority in the House, but the Republicans are the majority in the Senate. Leader McConnell has said, as it pertains to statehood, and I maybe this too, he doesn't want to discuss sort of Puerto Rico related issues. And it's unlikely that President Trump would entertain this. So this sort of goes nowhere, so to speak, correct me if I'm wrong, unless there's a change in leadership, right?
Well, yeah, my intention is to try to get this this legislation in front of the House of Representatives. That's the committee's job. That's my job, and I believe that there's good support on the Senate side. In different portions of it, Elizabeth Warren, others have indicated strong support for it. But my point is right now that let us do our job in the House, establish a template, and say this is what we believe is essential to keeping Puerto Rico on a path to full recovery from the fiscal crisis and full recovery from the natural disasters and the pandemic. Let's do that. I think there is popular support for that in the House. We'll do our job, and then I think the responsibility and the pressure then shifts to the Senate. The words from McConnell have not been encouraging, and the president's attitude toward Puerto Rico is always in question. But the fact that this is of urgency, and now you couple that with what this country's going through, the mainland's going through, the island's going through with this pandemic, and I think it just adds additional urgency and momentum to trying to get something done.
Okay. Representative Grijalva, I appreciate your time. Thank you for
Thank you very much. Very kind, David.
Yes, sir. So thank you. Just so everyone watching knows, the next step is to take this to committee. It'll be voted on in committee. Once it comes out of committee, then it would go to the full House, and then on from there. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.